Hi, and welcome to a sound clip from our Bible study discussions every Tuesday night from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. in Pakalani. Please enjoy.
For the first teaching of the year, or sharing of the year, or discussion for the year, we're going to go to the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. Shall we go to the story of Joseph? I'm going to go midway. So chapter 39, 40, and 41. Genesis 39. Are we all there? Just hang around there. Yeah. So I'm not specifically going to read anything from 39 and 40, but that's where the story comes from. So I think we're all familiar with the story of Joseph. He got sold off by his brothers for being a smart mouth, some people would say. But technically he was sharing a dream with them, and they didn't like that dream, and then they sold him off. And he ended up in Egypt, and he ended up being bought by an officer who works for Pharaoh. And while working for Pharaoh, he was accused of rape by Pharaoh's wife. So he ended up in prison. Hey, Batung, Potiphar's wife, thank you. Very, very good Bible scholars, theologians. He ended up being accused of rape by Potiphar's wife, right? That was the name of the officer that worked for Pharaoh. And while he's in there, there's some people that had some troubling dreams. And he was interpreting those dreams through the power of God, or through the knowledge of God. And if you look at verse 40, somewhere there in verse 40, these same people actually went and worked for Pharaoh again, right? One of them anyway. The other one was killed in connection with his dream. And one thing that Joseph said is, remember me when you are released and you go back and work in the office of the boss. This guy did not remember Joseph. But now where our talking point is in chapter 41, Pharaoh himself had some troubling dreams. He dreamt of 7 healthy cows, plump healthy cows, that were eaten by 7 scrawny, skinny looking cows. Then he dreamt again of 7 strands of wheat, healthy looking ones, that were eaten or consumed by skinny ones. And nobody in the land could interpret this dream. And this officer that was assisted by Joseph in prison, 2 years later, the Bible says, went back and said, no, but I remember there was a Hebrew man who was good at interpreting dreams. Maybe let's consult him. And he says something very cool in verse 8 of 41. Verse 8, he says, is it 8 or 16? So let's start reading from 15 actually. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. And this is the really cool thing that Joseph said. So Joseph answered Pharaoh saying, it is not me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Very similar to what was said to the same officers. If you look at chapter 40, verse 8. It says, and they said to him, we each have had a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. So Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please. So long story short, you guys, I'm telling you the chapters so that you can fact check afterwards. Right? 39, 40, and 41, that's the stories I've paraphrased. Right? Long story short, Joseph came to interpret these dreams, and it basically meant that the 7 cows represent 7 years of plenty, and the 7 scrawny ones represents following 7 years of famine, severe famine, it describes. So then he was given advice that this is what the Lord is warning you about. There's going to be 7 years of plenty, there's going to be 7 years of famine. So why don't you collect grain? Why don't you collect food? Why don't you store it? The Bible says 1/5 of produce per year. Right? So I know I've narrated a very long story. I've done my best to paraphrase 3 chapters. Right? But the talking point where I want us to land today, or the thing that struck me from this story, was there was a recognition of a season. And I'm thinking of how it's our first meeting of 2024, or in the first month of 2024. And we have somewhat entered a new season. All of us have a fresh 12 months. We're counting afresh. Month 1 to month 12. You can call that a new season. But even though the calendar year applies to all of us, I don't think we are all in the same season. Tuso shared a very, very interesting passage that I really love, Ecclesiastes 3, that says, for everything there's a time, for everything there's a season. So I think we can all relate that even in your same houses, where you grew up with your siblings, we can all be in the same house but not have the same year. Some people end up having a wonderful year. Your parameters and your thingies are the same. Other people have a really, really bad year. Like things just did not work out for them that year. So it's kind of having a same time. We are all in January, but some people are experiencing a spring. Other people are experiencing a winter. Some people are experiencing happiness. Some people are grieving. Or some people are in severe pain. When we look at this story, everyone was at the same time. Pharaoh was a national leader of Egypt. But he had 7 years head start of a season of plenty. Now, I like to imagine, I don't know how climate works. I hope you guys are staying with me. I have a point, I promise. I don't know how climate works. You know how Egypt has neighboring countries or in the region. So I'd like to theorize that the plenty perhaps didn't only apply to him. On an agrarian level, if they were farming, the neighbors the crops were probably also doing well as well. But if you look at the scriptures, the 7 years of famine applied all over the earth. That's what the Bible says. It affected many countries if you look at verse 56 of chapter 41. So my very, very simple point of discussion today is, as we approach 2024, as we enter into this new season, the interpretation of what season you are in belongs to the Lord. And I think it's wise of you to consider on a personal level what season the Lord is bringing you in. And a season of plenty can be very distracting, because you'll eat it up and think, oh, this is fun vibes. You can turn up and not really apply any wisdom. But sometimes a season of plenty actually means that's when you need to store some food away. Because you don't know what that food is going to help you to face. Perhaps there's an ongoing famine or there's an oncoming famine. You understand what I'm saying? And like I said, the seasons apply to us differently. So for a second, some of the point of discussions that I thought about applying this practically. Is perhaps you, in your life or in some arenas of your life, there's some work that you have to do that you haven't done. For some people, it could be a season of planting, and you haven't planted. But there's going to be a harvest time, and you'll have nothing to harvest because you haven't planted. There could be a season of storing, but you're not storing. And then at the time when you need to draw from reserves that you have stored, you cannot store. You cannot draw. So I want you to take what verse 16 and 41, chapter 41 says, and what verse 8 in chapter 40 says. Interpretation belongs to the Lord. My advice or my point of discussion is it's important now more than ever, especially as you grow up as an adult. You are accountable. You need to apply a heart of wisdom as to what season am I in, and what does the Lord need me to do in this season, whether there's a famine coming or not. Perhaps the Lord long told you to address something you're procrastinating, like forgiving somebody. Unless perhaps the Lord told you to adjust an attitude that He's been speaking to you about. If you look at Psalms 90 verse 12, it says, "Teach us to number our days so that we may gain a heart of wisdom." I was sharing that on a different platform quite recently. And what that helps me understand is stuff like this. That if you number your days, you do gain a heart of wisdom. 7 years of plenty is now dropped down to days that have action items to prepare for what's coming ahead. So that's just my encouragement for 2024. It's very important to discern the season, and the discernment of the season comes from the Lord. We are not the same. I think we've all been to these churches. Okay, maybe we haven't been to the churches where it's like at the beginning of the year, it's your year of prosperity, of harvest, stuff like that. And you know what I'm saying? And I'm not belittling that, but when I look back at stuff like that, it makes you really wonder that I don't know if it was really everyone's year for harvesting. Maybe it was some people's year for planting. So I think I'm talking too much. The point I'm trying to make, or the point I'm trying to throw across, is for every body in this room, you are in a specific season in your life. And I know Joseph is usually the hero of the story, and we always read the Bible from the perspective of Joseph, but today when I was reflecting on this, I was encouraged by the actions of Pharaoh. The Bible says that he had so much grain, and the countries that were also affected around him came to buy from them. That's how Joseph's brothers ended up coming to see the person they discarded, because a leader discerned the season and took action on what he's supposed to do. He didn't take the plenty for granted, and he listened. He paid attention to what was essentially a message from God, but I'm assuming he was an unbeliever, right? The Egyptians had a different religion. That was essentially a message from God. And even an unbeliever like him was sensitive to that, to discern what season he's in and what he must do. So that's just my point of discussion today. That's what I extracted from these 3 chapters. That we're all in a new year, we're not all in the same season. And discernment of the season is important, because the action items for us personally will be different. Comments, questions?
Thank you for taking your time to listen in. Feel free to add your thoughts in the comment section or join us in person if and when you can. May God bless you.